Hello and welcome to Raider HQ After Dark. I'm your host Raider, and in this video I'm going to be talking about sleep apnea. And for the most part I'm going to be talking about how it is currently rated under the current scheduler. Also go over the DBQ as to what's important and what satisfies each component of the rating if I was rating your sleep apnea right now. I will also talk about some aspects of the manual uh, regarding sleep apnea. There are some certain caveats to it that, certain things have to be true at certain times in order for you to get sleep apnea service connected. So let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. So this is the M21 manual, and I'm going to actually, per a request, I'm going to actually put the manual references and all the linking websites uh, in the video's description, so that way you can have access to it after the video's over. But I'm starting out with the manual today because I want to talk about sleep apnea and sleep studies. So in order to get a sleep apnea service connected, you actually have to have a sleep study on file. Now, you do not need one in order to have an exam requested. You could simply have symptoms of sleep apnea that you report in your personal statement. But there is something that I wanted to point out with this first manual reference, 584A2A, is that they have a provision in here that says if the clinical indicators for sleep apnea are not found upon like CMP examination, then they're not going to reach out to do a sleep study to confirm your sleep apnea. Now, what this essentially means is if you do not walk into your claim already having a sleep study, then you're at the whim of the medical examiner doing your CMP exam as to whether or not they do the sleep study to confirm your diagnosis. So, this can be a bad thing if you have an examiner who is top sheeting. They're just kind of like, oh, yeah, sure, whatever. And they're not really taking into account your symptoms that you're reporting, or maybe you're not reporting your symptoms as accurately as you could. So these are things to consider because this can be a barrier to actually getting service connection because we have to have a sleep study confirmed. So if the examiner is going to gatekeep the sleep study, then it would behoove you to front load your claim already having had a sleep study completed, if that makes any sense. So for this one, evaluating sleep apnea using, the 38 CFR Part 4, when determining whether 50% criteria is met, the key consideration is whether use of a quality breathing device, assistant device, is required by the severity of the sleep apnea. Now, what does this mean? This sounds pretty like, I need to have it measured or tested. That's not what it means. It means that I'm going to come over here to the 38 CFR and I'm just going to look, does it require the use of a breathing assistance device such as a continuous airway CPAP? That means prescribed, okay? You just have to have one prescribed. Compliance with usage is not a factor that I as a rater would consider. And we'll come back to I'll explain each one of these here in just a second. I wanted to just really go over the manual. The next part is 534A2C. Now, this talks about the CPAP machine is an example of a breathing assistance device for treatment of sleep apnea, which is required for assignment of the 50% evaluation. Other qualifying breathing devices. So this manual reference is important because there are substitutes for a CPAP. And for those out there that, a CPAP is not for them, but they want to get the 50% evaluation, these are a list of the alternatives that can be used to give you that same 50%. So other positive airway pressure machines, automatic positive airway pressure machine, oh God, Bilevel positive airway machine, a BiPAP, an APAP, nasopharyngeal appliances such as nasal dilators, nasopharyngeal stents, oral appliances, mandible advancement device, a MAD, that kind of made me giggle, tongue retaining mouthpiece, and implanted, oh geez, genioglossal nerve stimulation device. So some of you may have been denied because you didn't have a CPAP. I would advise you to go here to 534A2C and double check with your medical records whether or not you have an alternative qualifying device. This is a big deal. Not very many people actually go into the manual and look to see if they have a qualifying device, and they were just shortchanged by the rater who didn't actually look deeper into the manual to see if they actually had a qualifying device. So, required use of a breathing assistant device, assignment of 50% evaluation for sleep apnea under this regulation, entails the required use of a breathing device. Now, required use just means prescription, okay? That's all that means. Consider the factors below in determining whether or not the criteria for required use is met. So, use of the device absent of medical determination that the device is necessary does not qualify. So, what that means is you cannot just go out and buy a CPAP and say, oh, I need it. You can't do that. The regulation requires that the device be necessary, and this is a medical question. So, what they mean by that is you have to have a qualifying clinician, which is nurse practitioner and above, say that you actually need to have this. And here I'm going to circle back to this where it says, if the competent medical evidence of record shows that the use of a qualifying breathing assistance device is medically required, the fact that the claimant is not actually using it as prescribed is not relevant. So please keep that in mind. Don't be fearful that they're going to track you and that if you don't use it, they're going to just, take it away from you, because that's not the way any of this works. Okay, and then the final manual reference here is 534A2E. And this is just going to show you kind of how a claim for increase in sleep apnea is done. This is just the checklist that the VSR will use to kind of see, and potentially the rater will use to see, is there, has the sleep apnea been effective for 10 years or more? If yes, go to 6. This is just something you can review to kind of see the steps that go through for an increase of sleep apnea. But yeah, this is kind of just generic. But so I'm going to go back to the 38 CFR Part 4. And I'd like to talk to you about the 4 separate rating evaluations that you can get for sleep apnea or be assigned. So the first one is asymptomatic with documented sleep disorder breathing. So this is the apnea portion. So you don't meet any of the higher requirements up here yet. You just have a diagnosis and you have apnea and you have a sleep study that has been completed showing you have mild, moderate, or severe sleep apnea. Now, this right here is something that is rare. It's almost always skipped over. Very few people actually get rated at 30% for the persistent daytime hypersomnolence. And this is just tiredness, persistent tiredness during the day, due to the fact that you had such horrible sleep during the night. And there's no real test to qualify for this. So whenever you actually go to your CMP exam, it will be one of the questions that is asked, that they'll probe you for and kind of ask you questions about how your sleep is, and they'll see, what that kind of looks like. And if that's the case and that box is checked, then that's going to be 30%. And then we have the gold standard here, the fact that your condition you've been prescribed a CPAP machine. That's going to be 50%. And then you have the rare, but I have actually granted this beforehand, chronic respiratory failure with carbon dioxide retention or core pul- pulmonal or requires a tracheostomy. So that's going to be 100%. Now, unfortunately for this, these do require some interventions. So for the carbon dioxide retention, that's going to be a lab test. They have to find that out via a lab test. And I want to say that the core pulmonal is going to be an echocardiogram in order to kind of concede this. I'm not 1,000% on that, but and then the tracheostomy is going to be obviously a procedure that will be have to be shown in your records. So that's about it for what we're looking at for the rating of um, sleep apnea. Now let's go to the the DBQ. Sorry, I'm a little distracted. My dogs are just being naughty. So sleep apnea disability benefits questionnaire. This is going to be the one where the evidence that was reviewed is important for your private, for a private DBQ. And then we come down here. It honestly, does the veteran or have they ever had sleep apnea? This box has to be checked if you want to get granted. So if not, it's going to cause conflicting evidence if they say no here and then they say yes down here. So you're going to want to make sure if you're double checking your own DBQs, like if you have your doctor fill out a private DBQ, you want to check these things to make sure that they're dress right dress, that everything there's no conflicting statements that are in these documents. And then you can have any of these. Any of these qualify. Doesn't matter. Obstructive, central, mixed, doesn't matter to me. As long as something's checked, I'm a happy rater. And then when we go down to medical history, the medical history for this, like what's going to really matter in this section is if we're trying to prove the 30% persistent daytime hypersomnolence, that's where it's going to be kind of a word of mouth. It's going to take lay statements, lay evidence, lay reports by you, by other people, buddy statements that are going to really convince the examiner that you have that particular symptom. Okay. And then when we come down here, continuous medication is not part of the 38 CFR Part 4 of the VASRD. Whenever I rate this, the medications that you're on, it doesn't matter. You could be on all of the meds. It doesn't have an influence or bearing on how sleep apnea gets rated. Okay. Does the veteran require the use of a breathing assistance device, such as a CPAP machine? Watch. That's 50%. That's maximum 30%. Well, technically you could get the 100% if you showed the retention of, the carbon dioxide retention, but if you have that, you would clearly need a CPAP prescribed to you. So they kind of go hand in hand. So 30% maximum, 50 to 100% maximum. And then when we come down here, this is going to be another one of those situations where I want it dress right dress. If I have it to where the examiner says, yes, he does, and then they say no, does the veteran currently have findings or signs, symptoms attributed to sleep apnea? No. Now you might ask yourself, okay, Raider, you can clearly see that the guy wrote that there's a diagnosis up above, and you can clearly see that he checked that other box. Why would it matter to you if he said no here? And the reason why it would matter to me is because you could have had sleep apnea historically, lost a lot of weight, and it has resolved since then. So technically, you would have had a diagnosis in, say, 2016, you had a diagnosis of obstructive sleep apnea. That is true. Then you come down here and it's like, does the veteran has he or she ever had sleep apnea? Yes. These can be historical statements, okay? This question right here is, does the veteran currently have the condition? So this is why the DBQs, like keeping on top of your doctor and making sure they're checking the right boxes matters, okay? Because 3A is in the here and now. And that's what's important to us, in the rating community. Because, that might have been true then, but I care about what's true now. So if we're looking at the 0%, we would just have a yes here. Well, if we were looking at 0% service connection, this would be no, this would be yes, nothing would be checked. Okay, that's 0%. 30% is the checkbox of this right here. Now, like I said in my last video, I would like to see, I can take this at face value, but I would like to hopefully see that it's reported somewhere else in your medical records, that you have, lay terminology or the actual hypersomnolence listed somewhere else. But I will take this checkbox at face value. I just like more evidence. And then whenever we're looking at, when we're looking at 50%, you can have this box checked, but it would be just the fact that 2C is checked. And then finally, if we're rounding out the big four here, so this is going to be a with situation. And we haven't talked about with situations yet. So this is going to be, this has to be true for you to get the 100%. You have to have chronic respiratory failure with one of the three of these right here. That's the way that the terminology matters whenever we're reading the VASRD, because that's going to dictate what we have. Like, I might see, yes, you have all three of these, but if you don't have chronic respiratory failure, then you can't get the hundo. You can't get the 100%, okay? So the with matters. So you would need on this, you would have to have, now you wouldn't need for the 100%, you wouldn't need this checked. It's not a core requirement. However, this has to be checked, and it won't let me check it, but that's fine. So chronic respiratory failure must be checked for the 100%. And then you need one or more of these three right here. So please keep that in mind when you're reviewing, your DBQs, that's basically how we go about kind of when we start plugging into VBMSR, all of our little check boxes, we want to make sure that the check boxes are accurate, because if they're not, I can't go forward unless I get clarification and rule out, and kind of resolve the conflicting evidence. So, and that's about it. Does the veteran have any other findings? If you did, it wouldn't relate to your condition, right? So if you said you had like a hypertension due to it, I mean, that might be like you're trying to claim something secondary. But question 4A doesn't pertain to getting sleep apnea rated. Like, you can't have any other conditions that can be substituted for these. It's just kind of the way it is. And sometimes scars, these are just for, like, I can raise, if you had service connection for sleep apnea and for whatever reason you had the tracheostomy, that could cause a scar, right? So if you had the tracheostomy and they checked yes here, that would allow me as the rater to raise that scar to issue, even though you might not have claimed it. I can raise it to issue, and then I can separately rate it. Or sometimes I can rate it at 0% because you didn't claim it. And then if I think it's painful, I can send it back for an examination to have the examiner determine if it's painful. But this is important if if you do have scars related to a condition and you have a DBQ that talks about scars, it's just to allow us to raise those unclaimed secondaries, automatic secondaries, to issue so we can grant them. And then diagnostic tests. Okay, well, this is important right here, because in order for me to grant, you remember that manual reference that said, in order to grant, we have to have a sleep study. This is where they're going to be. I've got to be able to point to that sleep study. So what the examiner says has to match up with the evidence on file. I've got to be able to look and see. Now let's say that the examiner on the private DBQ mucked up and they put the wrong date or the wrong doctor. I don't care. As long as I've got a positive sleep study in any format, it can be a home sleep study, it can be a profession, like it can be one of the ones that the VA send home with you, and like an overnight one. You could have had a professional one where you go to a clinic and you sleep overnight and they kind of monitor you and whatnot. It doesn't matter to me. Like that quality of that test doesn't matter. You just need one. And then the other significant diagnostic tests or findings, not really relevant except for if you're going for the 100%, then you would probably want the blood test for the carbon dioxide retention on file somewhere. I'd need to be able to see it. I can't take their word for it. And then, does the veteran's sleep apnea impact his or her work? This is going to be, this statement right here is sometimes confused that if the examiner marks yes here, that means that the rater should have inferred IU. And that's not what this is for. It doesn't count for raising IU. It's not something I ever use to raise for IU. Some raters do for some reason, but the manual says that it's not actually, like the manual and QRT say that you can't use this alone to raise something to issue, because we're not supposed to raise something to issue that could be denied, because it's kind of a wasted effort. And then we have remarks here. Now the remarks section is another section where that that you can potentially find evidence. Like if you were denied for sleep apnea, say at 30%, I would go looking there and the other medical record in order to see if I can find any evidence of the persistent daytime hypersomnolence. And so that way I could at least, if they gave me 0%, I could maybe salvage the 30, do a higher level review and say, look, it's right here. They should have given it to me. Because for higher level reviews, you want to be able to point to something and say, hey, look, I think this might be not applied correctly, right? I can clearly see right here that they're saying hypersomnolence. Can you tell me, Mr. or Mrs. Dro, why they didn't give me the 30%? And that is about it for the DBQ. Once again, I always say, please review the NPI on the NPI registry. Review what the doctor put down when you're dealing with private DBQs. Make sure that all their stuff matches the NPI registry, the National Provider Identifier Registry. You could Google it and look up somebody's NPI number right now if you knew it. But always go and double check it, because if you have a private DBQ, that is the path of least resistance for them to throw out your private DBQ, because your NPI number, your examiner, your doctor's NPI number doesn't match what they put on the form. Oops, fraud, waste, abuse, whatever you want to call it. But anyway, that's about all I got for you for this video. I hope this one was helpful. I'm going to put all the links to, number one, to this DBQ, to the 38 CFR Part 4, and also to this portion of the manual in the video's description, so that way you guys can have it. And once again, I'd like to thank you all, those of you that are still watching this channel. I appreciate it, and I hope you're getting some value out of it. Just seeing from a rater's perspective, kind of how we do things. And that's about all I got for you. So once again, Rater out.